It is now 4:34. I'm going to give it a little bit of time and just a little bit about myself before we get started. My name is Phil Tenalia, and I am a pro-social matrix trainer and practitioner. I have been using the matrix ever since Kevin Polk developed it back in, I don't know, '09, I think, and have been working with him ever since. And my particular area was that I got it into schools back in 2014 when we first published the first ACT Matrix book. I wrote the chapter on psychological flexibility in education. And what I'm doing now is working to get it not only into schools, but into businesses and organizations. So what we're going to do today is we're going to take a look at how we can apply the matrix to creative problem solving. So now it's 4:35 and I don't see anybody else showing up, and hopefully you'll be able to hear this and recording will go out and we will take it from there. So I think what I want to do is I'm going to get started. So let me just kind of back up here a little bit. So you're going to see my eyes kind of moving around. I'm working slides and other things here. So it might look a little distracting, but when you're running the show, you've got to keep all these things flowing. So a long time ago, when I first started using the matrix, I gave a workshop that was called Setting the Context for a Creative Problem Solving. And that was one that Kevin and I had come up with. And it was my very first workshop and using the matrix, and it went very well. And I got to thinking that it would be very interesting to do a webinar on this, since I've been thinking a lot about it lately. And since problem solving is very near and dear to just about everyone's heart that I know of. So in terms of learning through the lifespan, one of the absolute necessities of life, in my opinion, is being able to solve problems. And right next to it is learning how to solve problems with and between others. So we need both of these skills pretty much everywhere we go. So we can agree then, I'm thinking, that being able to solve problems is very important, right? So that's kind of the idea here, is we're going to be looking at this idea of solving problems and using the matrix. So I'm going to start advancing the slides now. Just give me a second, make sure everything's running here. There we go. Okay, so hopefully at this point you can see slide number 2. And my question to you as you're looking at this would be, what grade would you give this character as far as his or her ability to problem solve? Now take a good look and come up with a number. And if you were here, oh, there's Barry. He says, I can hear and see you, but I don't think you can hear me. Yes, that is correct. All you get to do is chat. So, okay. I type back in, yes. You can communicate by chat. Okay, good. So Barry's there, and hopefully he can hear me. Now you're going to see me pause a bit. So since Barry's there, I might ask him to give my furry friend here a grade. And there's going to be a bit of a delay between when I speak and when you actually pick it up, because this signal has to go through lots of different permutations to get to you. So there is a bit of a delay. And I'm going to ask that question again. And the question would be, Barry, if you're bold enough, what grade would you give this character as far as his or her ability to solve a problem? Okay, so you're looking at him, and what grade would you give him? And now I'm going to pause for a couple of seconds. And obviously he is hard at work, and we're going to wait and see if Barry comes up with something. I'm sure you guys who have been watching now will already have your letter grade, or you could do a number grade. I like letter grades because they're easier. And we'll see what Barry wants to do. And we'll give him another second. And, well, you know what? Yes, that's right. Do I mean the squirrel? And now we're going to go, yes. That would be it. Now let's see what he says. Since he's hearing me, I'm glad to see that the signal's coming through loud and clear. And after he tells me, I'm going to tell you what grade I would give this particular character. All right, so we're just going to keep going. I think Barry will probably pop in here at some point. So I'm going to give this little critter an A+ as far as problem-solving skills go. And he probably has not attended any webinars or downloaded anything onto his Kindle. No. More likely than not, he figured it out in life, and he has gotten pretty darn good at it, wouldn't you think? So we humans are up against some other stuff besides figuring out how to get our next meal. It's a little bit more complicated than that. We have these brains to figure things out and build things and, get stuff to keep us alive, just like our friend here. And it turns out that these same big brains have minds, and something our problem-solving expert here lacks. Now, minds are funny things because they can come in pretty handy and they can get us horribly stuck. And, they generate all kinds of thoughts all day long because that's what they're designed to do. Now, to be fair, I would say when I'm talking about mind, I'm really talking about language. And language is what allows us to communicate and share experiences and all that good stuff. And language, though, can also work against us. Okay. So when we get stuck on words, and I mean like words in our head, sometimes words coming at us, but a lot of times it's words in our head, and they show up inside of us, and it can get pretty uncomfortable, and we can actually get to the point where we're really kind of living in our heads and doing less of what matters. And that's what acceptance and commitment therapy and training, which the Matrix is based on, is all about. It's about, getting out of your mind and into your life, like Steve Hayes wrote in that book many years ago. And a lot of what goes on with your mind is really the byproduct of trying to solve problems. So I figure if a squirrel can figure stuff out, then perhaps our minds are really not as important as we think they are when it comes to the everyday problems we face. Now, of course, we need them. And also, though, we're going to need something else if we're going to really kind of make some headway. So from all of these years of playing with the Matrix and watching others do the same thing, there's something else going on, I think. And in terms of ACT and the Matrix, we call that process. And when we use the Matrix, we are really returning to the original process of how we learn. And the Matrix is going to help us set up this process within a very flexible context. And when we do that, the mind is really still important. We're not saying it's not important, but it's really kind of along for the ride. And now most minds don't really like being along for the ride. But when we have the sensing and our noticing and our responding becoming more of the driving forces, the mind can kind of sit back and relax. And it still plays its part and lets the rest of what we have to offer contribute. So let's move on to the next slide. So, the pro-social matrix is really a great process, and it's a tool that we can use to set up creative problem solving. And when you do that, you're really handing yourself and those you serve a very flexible, and it's immediately useful. And I mean like right away. When I take it out and I show it to people, they really start using it right away. And it's a great way to get individuals what I call percolating, which is kind of like sitting back and taking stock and letting stuff kind of come up for them and come up with new moves that they can go ahead and try out there in the world. And that's really kind of what we're up to. And the sooner that we can get that whole problem-solving thing down, the better off we are. And by that, I mean, I'm going all the way back to the early years, like kindergarten or even earlier, and that's when we want to be learning problem-solving skills right from the earliest stages. And from my experience, it's really interesting to note, having spent many, many years in school, how little time we actually devote to learning that skill. And you would think that we would be all over that kind of stuff in education, but it really is not the case. We do spend a lot of time with other kinds of problems like math problems and multiple choice tests and fill in the blanks, and all that stuff has its place, don't get me wrong, but we spend a lot less time on everyday living kinds of problems. The kinds of problems that don't have those neat answers, that there aren't bubbles that we can fill in, or there is usually more than one way to go, and you don't really know how things are going to turn out. So what I have been up to is using this matrix and getting it into as many families and schools and businesses and organizations as I can, since it works really well to come up with solutions. So let's move on. All right. So now you could just take a problem, and most of us just without the matrix, you could just take the problem and you could go ahead and solve it. Now, that's what most of us do most of the time, and it works out just fine. Now, I'm not really talking about those kinds of problems tonight because we really don't need the matrix for them. Again, back to our friend the squirrel. Squirrels don't go using a matrix when they go looking for something to eat, right? It's pretty simple. No. We're going to be using the matrix when we get stuck on something. Whether you're stuck as an individual or the group that you're working with is stuck, it's kind of like when you got something stuck in a drawer and you keep yanking and you keep tugging on it and it gets really wedged in there more and it won't budge. That kind of feeling. But the matrix, then it turns out, is great for that. And it's exactly what I tell people. So when they come in to see me, they have already been tugging at their problem and yanking at their problem and throwing things at their problem and even telling themselves stories about how horribly stuck they are. And the adding of the words and the beliefs are like icing on the cake, which has been kind of concocted by that wonderful mind of ours. Remember that little guides along for the ride? So now I know I got some work to do, which is to get my point of view up, which is going to be getting the matrix up in front of them and helping them to sort the problem onto the matrix. And I may even say something like this. Well, hey, it sounds like you're trying to solve a problem, correct? And you've put a lot of work into it. So I can see and I can hear that. So it just so happens that I have this great little point of view that I can use, and it works really nicely to help people figure things out. So is it okay if I show you? Now, what I have found is when I do that, the process now has begun. And here's the first step that we're going to talk about in the problem-solving process. And the process that's begun is we have taken the first step towards creative problem-solving, and that is orienting myself and whoever I'm working with or the group I'm working with in how we're going to approach things, otherwise known as the problem-solving attitude. And the attitude that I'm going to take with the pro-social matrix is a very open and accepting one. I'm setting things up at this point so that who I am with will want to come with me. And I'm generating interest by engagement. And people start to lean in. And I'm doing this to set the context for creativity and also for increasing the chances that they are going to come up and start moving in directions that'll work for them without me telling them what to do. Because most folks are used to telling other people what to do, and they're used to being told what to do. And that don't feel so hot most of the time. So, and if that worked, they wouldn't be sitting there with me, right? I want them to be able to experience the problem differently. And that's really what we're going to be doing here, is helping them to experience this problem differently. So to get that cooking, we are going to be moving on to the way I'm going to do it is we're going to do 2 loops around the matrix. So the first thing I want to do is quickly run through the first loop. And so first I'm going to introduce them to the point of view. I've just started to do that. And I'm going to use and invite them to try it out with me. And like I said, these days it's going to be 2 loops around the matrix. So we're going to do that first loop. And this would be how I would start the first loop around the matrix. Okay, so I'm going to ask this question. Who is important to you? All right. Now, I'm not sure if Barry can hear me or not. He could actually type in who's important to him. But that's a very interesting question. Okay. And it's a very simple question. It's how I start all of my problem-solving routines and workshops and trainings and, sessions and all that kind of stuff. And, the idea about this is whatever they answer, it's going to be right. Oh, Barry can hear me. Okay. So he said his family's important to him. Terrific. So, and my family's important to me too. So I want people thinking about their important folks and thinking about, who's important to you. People start, things start lighting up inside of people's brains and the social centers of your brains in particular. And that gives you probably a nice little squirt of dopamine would be my feeling. And that's that kind of nice warm stuff, that warm fuzzy stuff that we get. And it starts to lubricate the brain, and it engages other connections too. And you can actually see that. They've kind of shown this on like PET scans and that kind of stuff, where when you get people socially engaged, it starts to light up different areas of the brain. And we're going to be using that for this problem-solving conversation that's going to follow. Okay? So, it might sound silly to some people, for those of you who maybe haven't used the matrix, but believe me, starting out this way will make things a whole lot easier down the road. We're setting it up in the beginning to make it easier down the road, especially when it comes to these more sticky, pesky kind of problems. So then I'm going to give a quick run through the matrix. So after I've asked that question, and Barry's already, talked about who's important to you, and he's kind of chatted that up. And family, I might say family. Somebody else might say a friend, a family pet. It could be just about anybody. But we all have somebody that's important to us. Even if, I'm working with younger people, and a lot of them like to say, well, me, I'm important to myself. Great, So we're going to get that up on the board. And then after that, I'm going to quickly be then talking about the yucky stuff that can show up and get in the way over there in the lower left. And the example I like to use always is fear. And fear might be, you want to go and do something that you haven't done before, for example. Maybe you're going to go jump off a diving board, right? And maybe you haven't done that before. So you get there on the edge of the diving board, and what do you got? Well, you got some fear showing up inside of you, right? So if you go with that fear and you let the fear get a hold of you, you might not be doing too much diving. You might be kind of slinking off the board or crawling back, back onto the pool deck. But the idea would be is that we can have that fear, and we can either avoid it by just kind of letting it run the show, or we can kind of take it with us. And most of us have learned that, okay, I'm going to go jump in, hold my nose and hope for the best. And that's the kind of yucky stuff that shows up and gets in the way. So we're going to list that, the kind of yucky stuff that might show up. It might get in the way of people. It could be fear, could be anxiety, it could be anger, frustration, just about anything uncomfortable people have told me over the years. And we're going to put all that stuff down there in the lower left. And then I'm going to show them that, all that stuff is the stuff that shows up in your mind. And now we're going to kind of go up into the upper left. And now I would like to ask you, what might I see you do to move away from that uncomfortable stuff that shows up inside of you? And here, then, people start to tell me the things that they do. So back to our diver, if the fear got a hold of the diver, we might see the diver in the upper left. They might say, well, I wouldn't go. I would just walk away. I'd get off the board. Oh, okay. So getting off the board, not jumping into the pool, might be something that they do. Or they might just stand there and they don't know whether to go or stop. And then you've got people behind them going, hey, come on, jump off the board. So, of course, that works really well to get people moving, as we know. So that kind of stuff. And, the typical things that people do, they yell to move away from their anger. They might throw something to move away from a feeling of frustration showing up on them, that sort of thing. And then we're going to be, after that conversation takes place, now we're going to be over here talking about the things that they want to be able to do to move toward that important person that they just talked about, or persons. So, if it's a family member, it might be my wife, I would maybe give my wife a hug, or I'd take my son and I would take a drive to Dunkin' Donuts, to our favorite place to go get a snack, stuff like that. So we're just really kind of orienting people to what's going on in the board. And we complete that first loop. And now we've established this very flexible point of view from which to look back on whatever is going on that they're come here to see me about, either individual or group, in terms of the problem they're facing. And now we've got this learning process going. And, the learning process would be is, we take in information from our five senses. It shows up in our minds. And then we can notice that, what's going on outside of us may be different than what's happening on the inside of us. And then at the same time, you're looking at that vertical line in terms of everything that we do is we're doing to either move toward who's important to us, or we're doing things to move away from that yucky, uncomfortable stuff that shows up inside of us. So what we've done now is we've just added something new when we have gone through this first loop of the matrix. And the thing that we've added new is this thing called noticing. Okay. And noticing is really what adds something different to the stickiness or the uncomfortableness that's getting in the way of that problem being worked through and being resolved, and having people come up with, things that they can do. And noticing is really what allows individuals and groups to gain what we call perspective, to back up a bit. Now, it's not necessarily going to solve the problem. That's not what it's designed to do at that point. The purpose of noticing is really just, it kind of gets you to kind of take a step back, get a wider perspective, a bigger picture view, and it begins to change the relationship to the problem. And that allows individuals and groups to look at things from a more distance and a comprehensive kind of perspective. And that includes also, when you're looking at that, you're also looking at who and what's important to you. So the whole thing just loosens individuals and groups up to be what I would call being more creative. So let's move on. So the next thing we're going to be looking at is, once we've gone through that first loop, we're going to be now coming into the second loop. We're ready to run through the second loop. Now, the first loop we just did for what we call psychological flexibility. And that's back here, right? Psychological flexibility, I'm going to just back up here a bit, is really this noticing. We're noticing who's important to us. We're noticing the yucky stuff that shows up that gets in the way. Noticing the stuff that we do to move away, and also noticing the stuff that we want to do to be able to move toward. And that whole noticing thing is really, this idea of being aware in the present moment, and also being able to have this uncomfortable stuff and continue to do things that are going to work to keep us moving toward that important stuff down here. And that's what psychological flexibility is all about, is making these kind of moves in directions that work for us while in the presence of that yucky stuff. And in this case, it's going to be in the presence of whatever that problem is that people are trying to resolve. So moving back to the second loop, now we're going to be looking at things from another perspective here. And you don't really have to do the first loop. If people have already done the matrix work, those of you that are out there that are already using the matrix, you may or may not need the first loop. I'll just say that up front. Very often, sometimes I'll just pop up the second loop because I know the people that I'm working with have already been exposed to the first loop and they kind of get it. And maybe they're already pretty flexible to begin with. So, but definitely you want to be doing 2 loops at the beginning just to kind of get your feet wet with it and get people oriented, especially if they haven't seen it before. Doesn't take too long. You don't have to spend a lot of time on that first loop. And you're putting that in terms of, we're going to be putting that problem stuff into the matrix. So now we're back and we have a different question for the second loop. And the second loop is really for the group. And a group is really 2 or more people. So if you're sitting there with somebody, you're actually really a group. So if I'm sitting there with a student or a family, or I'm working with a business or an organization, I'm with a group. So now, we're there talking about what's the shared purpose. What is it that we're here to do, right? And once we get that shared purpose going, we want them to be able to use that and move through the process now, so they can come up with new actions that they could take. And I want them to be able to try that out in the world to see how these actions work. And the shared purpose is where they really want to be heading. And that's the secret to problem solving. They have been heading toward the problem, and that hasn't worked out so well. Now, heading toward problems is really not what I would call a valued direction. They do show up and they do get in the way. But moving toward a relationship, for example, being a better boss or a worker, learning, there's where people really want to be heading. So we want to have a discussion about these things, because the rest of that pro-social problem-solving process is really going to be orienting people toward this shared purpose here in the lower right, and putting a lot less energy into the problem. It's really kind of like problem solving minus the problem, because the more you're talking about the problem, the more they're creating the story about the problem. And we want to get a more backed up perspective so people can start coming up with actions that are going to work better than the ones that they've been using up to this point. So we're going to do that next. And then we're going to get into the next phase of the problem solving, which we're going to known as classically as defining the problem. And by this, we want to get the lay of the land down in terms of the different aspects of the problem. So what that means is whatever issues that individual or group is facing, we're going to be sorting the problem or the issue onto the matrix. And any problem they have is going to have a 5 senses experience to it, right? They're going to see, hear, touch, taste, smell something. It's going to have a mental experience to it. And that mental experience is going to be also in terms of stuff that they want to move toward, as well as uncomfortable stuff that's showing up inside of them or inside of the group. And it's also going to be including, like I said, whatever it is that they want to move toward, as well as maybe they might have to do some away moves, or maybe they're already doing some away moves. Okay, so that's what we're doing. We're taking that problem and defining the problem by sorting the different aspects of it onto the board. So now I have a different matrix diagram up here. And, the way it's going to work then is, I'm just kind of orient you. And, now we're looking at this, and here's my little cheat sheet. Over here, we have our wants in the lower right. Over there, we have the don't wants. And in the upper left, you can see, I've called that the fix-its. And these are the things that we're doing to fix the don't wants. And if we're spending a lot of time on the fix-its to fix the don't wants, we're not spending as much time as we need to be coming up with something new. And that's what problem solving is all about, is it's up there on the upper right, coming up with something new. And something new could be a toward move, and something new could be an away move. So let's say that someone has come in to work with me, and they've had an argument with somebody. As a matter of fact, I just had a situation like that occur earlier today, and they want something. And what do you think they might be after, given the fact that they are coming in to see me? So I might pause, and we'll see if Barry's still aboard. And if somebody's coming in and, they've had an argument with somebody, and, they're coming in to see me, and now, let's think about this in terms of what side of the matrix do you think they might be on? Would you think they'd be on more on the right side, or are they more on the left side? What would you say? And I'm going to pause. Let's see if Barry wants to type something in here. And think about yourself. Think about the people that you work with. And when they come to you with a sticky problem, let's just think about what side of the matrix do you think they might be on? Okay. Now wait for Barry another couple of, Barry, he went with the left. I would go with the left too, right? They are in the land of don't want, is what I would say. And they are looking for the upper left, which is the fix it. And here's the secret. I don't have the fix it, but I can tell you that looking for the fix it, the way they're trying to go about this whole thing, is probably not going to work. But again, I'm willing to sit with them and help them work through this. I'm willing to kind of take that journey with them. And that's really the spirit of ACT is, if we had the words that worked, we would be selling them, making millions of dollars, and nobody really has the words that work. What we're trying to do with ACT and with the matrix is point people back at experiencing. And experience is really what's going to get you through and help you come up with things that work. And I can tell you that in the moment, they are not thinking too much about who and what's important to them, at least not before we start doing some matrix work. They're really looking for relief. And that's what the fix-its are all about, is you're looking for relief from that yucky stuff there in the lower left. So, something is stuck. Again, think about that drawer that I talked about. And my job is to help get this problem-solving process rolling along again. So, as I said, I want to point them at experience. So today, I met with two people who were having a conflict. And we started with the shared purpose, which for them, and I asked the question, what's the shared purpose for you folks? And for them, the purpose was relationship. And also, they have a sense of community that they share. So we started that off right from the beginning of the conversation. And then we went into finding out about the 5 senses experiencing of the argument, kind of who were they arguing with? Was it a friend? Was it somebody that wasn't a friend? Of course, now friends are important. I want to think about that too. What words did they use? And we're going to put that stuff up on the board, right? So friend would go in the lower right. Words that they use, well, it could be words that they might, and I might ask them, did they feel like moves toward when that person said X to you? Did it feel like a move toward the relationship, or did it feel like a move away from something uncomfortable? And then we're looking at their responses and, kind of tracking through. And now the stuck point is going to be the fix-it stuff that they talk about. Well, I walked away from that person, or I said something nasty back to that person, whatever it is that they started doing, or I had a thought in my head, I don't want to talk to you anymore. And that's kind of the idea here, right? And this is, this kind of fix-it stuff. And this is the stuff where we get stuck, where the squirrel doesn't. I mean, the squirrel just knows how to problem solve. He doesn't have to think about it. He's just going for it. And we get stuck on that yucky stuff down there in the lower left. And then now we're working to do things to get away from it. And the fix-its are only going to work in the short term anyhow, if they work at all, and will probably get us more stuck. And that's what was happening here, is their efforts to try to solve the problem of the relationship was resulting in more stuckness. So what we did was we just were sitting there noticing all of this, and then we can do that very easily and stay with this process to promote psychological flexibility. And that's really all I'm trying to do at this point, is promote that flexible stance again, and not the solution stance, because that really in the end is going to increase the chances that they will go on and come up with something new, as in something they haven't done yet. And they're still going to have those urges. That stuff in the lower left is still going to show up. And they're still going to have an urge to try and fix it. And we can even notice that too. And we can sort that on the matrix as well. So that's kind of what we did today. And they were able to get to where they wanted to get to at the end of the meeting in terms of their relationship. Okay. So that's really kind of how it might work if we were using that pro-social matrix. And it's going to work the same way. And I'm going to put the good old original pro-social matrix up here. And it works the same way with a group, and a larger group. I mean, it could be a work group. And that group is going to have the advantage of even more, minds that are loosened up, as it were. And now they can come together and they can share what they're noticing in the room in real time. And if I can get some of that sorting going, asking them to put stuff up on the board and sorting it up there for them, we're going to get to the moment, and this is what happened today. You're going to get to the moment where someone's going to say something like, I could. And as soon as I hear that, I know that what's going on, I'm going to back up here, is they are coming up with something new. And I'm going to throw a techie term at you here. That's what we call derived relational responding, because they just derived it up. Okay. It came out of the experience, right? And it's related to the stuff they want and the stuff they don't want, right? And it's a response. They're coming up with a new response. They just derived it up as a result of going through this particular process. Okay. So I could just go and talk to so-and-so and say, I'm sorry for yelling, or I'm sorry that I didn't hear you say whatever, and then explain what was going on for me. And that's kind of paraphrasing one of the things that happened today. Another thing is, well, maybe the best thing to do is that just leave it be and let things cool down for a while. Well, that could be something that could be a toward move and letting things be, or not speaking to each other for a period of time. That could be what we call an away move that would work. And either way is fine, right? Because we're not looking for the right, correct answer. We're looking for responses that work. And this is naturally now really getting into the next phase of problem solving, is called brainstorming, right? And brainstorming is where we come up with new moves that we could go and try out. And what we're doing at this stage is we're just generating ideas. Again, no right or wrong solution. And the ideas we generate, and we just want to generate them and get that problem solving engine cooking. And, we're helping people sort those experiences into the matrix, increasing that flexibility. They are loosening up, and they're also feeling safe, because we have now made it safe to have these discussions. As we're having these discussions, we're putting stuff up on the board, and people are feeling like they're being heard and they're being understood, and we're not pointing fingers. We're just also looking at the board too. And it gets an even more backed up perspective. And now that brainstorming starts to take off. So it's loosening it up, what's stuck, and the natural process of solving problems just starts to kind of take hold. And it can do its own thing, like our friend the squirrel back there. And the kinds of things that stops problem solving and to shut that process down would be when being on the lookout for the mind here. Here's where the mind might pop back up again, because the mind loves to do things like evaluate, and it likes to judge, and it likes to evaluate moves in terms of right and wrong, and things like that won't work, or I can't do that kind of thoughts show up on the inside, and people could say that on the outside. And that's the kind of stuff that grinds the process down. But when we're doing matrix work, that's just stuff that we can say, oh, so you're having that thought, this won't work. And then I might say to them, hey, does that feel like a move toward, or does that feel like a move away? And in the moment that I'm saying that, I'm taking those words and I'm inviting them to put them up on the board. But before they even get up on the board, they get to kind of step back a little bit and take a little bit of a perspective. And they're taking a wider perspective because they're also taking their perspective as well. I'm here, there's that stuff there, and I've still got people here, and I still have this shared purpose. So with all of that going on, it's really going to work very nicely to keep people moving in a direction that's going to work for them, or at least increase the chances. So the idea when you're doing this is you have to be letting go of the outcome and just letting the process do its thing. Because that's what brainstorming is we're just throwing stuff up onto the matrix. We're not getting into whether it's going to work or not. We're just generating ideas. And you can do this with individuals, and you can do this with groups. It works great because they're not being judged, and anyone in the room can come up with an idea. And if you've done that 2 loops, the group members are now feeling safe enough to do that. And now it's going to increase not only individual problem solving, it's going to increase the problem solving of the group as a whole. And you could even extend it to, we're going to get to this next step here. The next step after that is going to be evaluating. So now that we've got stuff up on the board, now we can kind of use that evaluating stuff. And we can say things like, okay, so what do you think you might notice if you did whatever that thing is? If you went to that person and said you were sorry, how do you think that person might react? Or what might you notice that person doing? So now I'm extending it out even beyond what's happening in the room. We're extending it out in terms of, gee, how's that going to look back out there in the real world? And, we're evaluating, and now they're kind of picking, figuring out what they might try. And, once the individuals and the groups have done this a bit, and they're really ready to pick some things out. And that would be the committed action part of ACT, whereas they're taking an action and say, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to try that one out. And that's what we call a committed action. And now they're going to be evaluating still, and their minds are now coming in handy, and they're being more useful than they were back there, trying to sidewind the process and saying, well, that won't work. And then the whole thing at the end of the day is going to be all about what we call workability, because the matrix is really, as Kevin Polk has labeled it, the workability model. And what we're doing here with the matrix is we're looking for actions that work to get people where they want to go and in life, in terms of living the life that you want. And that's going to include toward moves, moving toward people. It could also include away moves. Taking a break is a perfectly legitimate away move kind of thing to do. Maybe the best thing to say if you're at a meeting is, I'm not going to say what's on my mind right now, because if I do say that particular thing, that might just fan the flames here. So for right now, I'm going to keep that one to myself. That could be a very workable away move in a meeting. And all of that is about this shared purpose, which is outside of the matrix. As you can see, we draw that circle around the matrix to represent the individual, can represent the group. And we're always working and asking the question, is what I'm doing working to get me where I want to go? Or is what we're doing as a group working to get us where we want to go toward that shared purpose that we've been talking about and that we have to keep coming back to over and over again. So that's really the issue of workability here. So then the next stage is going to be monitoring and reviewing. And this is so much fun. This one no one wants to do, and minds don't like doing this either. But it's really, really important to be able to do this. Folks need to be monitoring, and they need to be monitoring what they're doing. And, like I said, minds don't like to do that. And keeping track of things is not fun. It's not glamorous. It's just something that needs to be done. Otherwise, you don't know what's going on, and you don't know if what you're doing is really working. So you got to go out and pick whatever you're going to do and test it out. Okay, try it out. And you want to try it out and see if it works. And if it works, great, you're going to keep it. Or if it doesn't work, well, that's a good thing that we tried out. That didn't work so hot. Now we can try something else. We can go back and try plan B or plan C, or we may even come up with a new plan that is now showing up inside of us because we're more flexible. And, that's going to lead back to the shared purpose and what we're up to and what else we could be doing to try or to try out. So monitoring and reviewing, really, really important. So what I want to do now is I'm going to put up the slides here. So just give me a minute. And I have my little offer thing. Okay. And you should see on your chat, now it's changed over. And the offer that I'm giving today is really just very simple. I have the slides here. And if you click on that little blue bar there, then you are going to be able to get the slides from this particular webinar and this particular training. So I'm going to leave that up for just a little bit, and I might take it down just to see if Barry has any questions and put it back up again. So let me just go through the rest of this. So just to kind of sum things up today, psychological flexibility will loosen people up so they can get engaged and they can notice workable actions and the results. And the second loop, or the psychological safety loop, is going to make it safe for people to speak their mind, generate ideas with less judging. I like to say that people have my back, and I have your back, you have my back. It's okay. And it's going to work very nicely to come up with creative solutions to whatever problems that they face. And, conversely, the lack of psychological flexibility and safety will lead to more of that fix-it stuff and fixing the stuff that I don't want kind of attempts. And that's that loop that we all do when we're just doing that same thing over and over again and things aren't getting better. And when this happens, less gets done. If we look about it in terms of matrix work, more stuff is going to show up in the lower left, and problem solving can kind of grind to a halt. So let me just jump back here for just a second and we'll come back to that. All right. So if we're over here, let me come back one more, almost. There we go. What's going to happen is if we don't have that stuff going and we're not working toward the shared purpose, this stuff the list begins to grow and more frustration shows up, especially if you're spending time trying to get away from it and you get a little bit of relief, but rats, it's still down there. So it's going to generate a lot more of that. And it starts to generate a lot more of these away moves. And then the individual or the group is doing a lot less of these toward moves. And that's what I mean about generating resentment and frustration. So coming back to it, if we look at this in terms of work teams, and a work team, business organization, when work teams are broken down and dysfunctional, they become very expensive and hard to fix. So if you're a member of a work team and you're working for a business and you have these teams that aren't getting along, well, it gets to be expensive because businesses then don't like that and they start losing money. And now from the perspective of educational teams, and I think of educational teams as a classroom as an educational team, or the people that you work with that support the classroom, that's part of your educational team. Your administrators and your teacher and your parents, they're all part of the team too. And when those teams become broken, there are more disruptions and there's more interpersonal conflicts that start to erupt. And then you get a lot of command and control issues like you need to, and that person needs this and that this person needs that. And there's less engagement. People become less engaged, and involvement in learning for students and staff really starts to kind of get very sticky, very uncomfortable, and you get less involvement. And then I just asked the question, well, the same thing could happen in the family. And when families get broken, well, fill in the blank, So, to come to the end of it, the pro-social matrix, as I have been talking about today, can get everyone unstuck and moving. and you'll have more investment in problem solving if you do it this way, guaranteed. And it's going to feel better. It's going to feel more collaborative. You're going to have some pretty effective communication. And, at work, you're going to have more productivity. You're going to have a happier and a healthier workplace and a happier, healthier classroom. So that's it. I'm going to be back again next month. And as always, if you're interested in learning more or doing some training, you can schedule a consultation at my evolvingsolutions.co. There is a calendar there that you can look on if you want. It's a free consultation, doesn't cost you anything, just a chat, just conversation. But I am available for pro-social matrix consulting and training. I will come to your place, and I can also offer some online training as well. It's a lot of fun. People enjoy it. And those of you that are out there using the matrix, I'm sure you're enjoying it too. So that's my pitch for tonight. And let me just go back up here before I sign off. I want to see if Barry, who joined me tonight, if he has any questions, since he was signing in today. So I'll stop here. And Barry, if you have a question or a comment, something that popped up while I was giving this webinar tonight, feel free to chat that in, and I'll wait a couple of seconds. And if not, then I'll be signing off. And you folks will be getting a copy of this webinar that will be showing up in your mailbox, in your email box. And you can watch it whenever you want. It's called a webinar replay, and it works very nicely. And if you have any other questions, certainly you can feel free to email me. If you're doing something pretty cool, I always like to hear what kind of matrix stuff is going on out there, and that kind of stuff. And Barry says, good, great presentation. Okay. Thank you very much, Barry. And everybody out there, stay healthy, and I will be back again next month. If somebody has a thought about something you'd like to see me present, please feel free to throw your hat into the ring, and I'll be more than happy to see what I can do. All right. So take care.